your real life starts after the military. I mean, for sure. There's so many skills you have. Just I would say take stock of your toolkit. You know, your emotional toolkit, your intellectual toolkit, everything you have that the military's taught you, and try to figure out as you're transitioning how you can apply those skills in the civilian world, because we go through a whole lot of stuff that civilians do not go through, not even close, and that they can't even relate to. So it's not only just about understanding what tools you have and how to use them, but also being able to be smart with how you explain things to other people, because we're used to a certain way of doing things in the military. The civilian world doesn't act that way, and a lot of veterans have trouble meshing into the civilian world. So really be careful with your words, not for fear of anything bad happening, but just be careful with your words, because most likely the way you want to explain it, the person on the receiving end is still not going to understand. you know so you have to be the one to try to bridge that gap.
This is the Living Legends series, where we talk to incredible humans about their wins, losses, and their strategies for becoming legendary. Let's jump into it. So Spencer, I would describe you as a maverick, somebody
Maverick.
that,
Oh man.
yeah,
Okay.
somebody that's almost mythical. I know you as a veteran, a father, and just an all-around boss. But for anybody that doesn't necessarily know you yet, could you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Okay, so I'm an expat. I'm a former Army warrant officer, attack pilot. I flew Apaches, 2.5 years in Afghanistan and Iraq. I used to be a professional musician before that. Had my own recording studio here and there. A published author. I just published a book. And now I fly helicopters and airplanes overseas in Eastern Europe, in Romania. I live in Bucharest. So, all kinds of stuff.
That's cool. And you summarized a lot of the things that you've done in life in like a minute or so. But so when you transitioned out of the military, you were able to use your transferable skills to just really get to the next level. And I feel like everybody has their own military veteran transitioning story. But could you talk about what it was like for the first few months after you got out as a pilot?
Sure, absolutely. It was in 2020. For warrant officers and O grade officers, we have to basically request to get let out. So we have to basically technically resign, and that's about a year long process to make sure that gets done. So in 2019, after Afghanistan, we didn't know the pandemic was coming. So at that time, we had a lot of airline pilots hiring us rotor scum, because there's a global airline pilot shortage, which there still is. And my little brother is a pilot for the Air Force. He just transitioned to Delta, so he's flying out of New York City. And my dad was a 30-year airline pilot with FedEx. So, great lifestyle. I saw it, fly 10 days a week, make, a couple $100,000 easy a year, and basically free plane tickets anywhere you want to go. Like, you can't ask for a better life. So after
Right.
12 years in the military, I was like, that sounds pretty good. And they're actually looking at us helicopter pilots, and they were paying for training, which is awesome, to transition to airplanes. So I made the decision to get out. And then as I was getting out, I had a conditional job offer from a regional airline, and just like a lot of my friends at the time did. And then when I finally did get out, uh, COVID. I got done with my airplane training, and COVID. They're like, "Hey, um, yep, sorry, we don't have a job for you." So I went from thinking I had a pretty sweet gig
Gosh.
lined up to all of a sudden, nothing at all. So um, then I talked to my fiance, would be then wife, and she worked for NATO, and she was like, "Hey, I have a lot of friends in the Romanian Air Force." She's Romanian, and maybe one of them can get you a job over there. I think some of them fly for airlines in Europe. And I was like, okay, cool, awesome. See if you can get me a gig. And so I had job interview, and everything seemed good. And so we moved to Romania, which for her, I mean, she grew up here, she knows the country and all that. So it's, lived most of her life here. And I've been a couple times. It's like, oh, this is really awesome. It's on the same latitude as New England. I grew up between New
Mm.
York City and Boston in Connecticut. And so walking around the woods of Transylvania feels like walking around the woods of Connecticut. The trees are the same, the grass is the same. Everything's very, very similar. So it felt like home. So I had no problems with the thought of moving overseas. And especially after 2.5 years in Iraq and Afghanistan, pretty much anywhere seems just peachy. So, um,
Right.
but I got here, and then sure enough, the same thing happened. Just like 8 months later or a year later than it did in the U.S. Nah, that's cool. COVID, we're not hiring.
Oh my
So
gosh.
here I was in Romania with a wife who's working, and then and she was pregnant at the time. We have an 8-month-old son now, and no job.
Congrats.
Yeah, thanks, man. So yeah, so it was definitely different than I imagined it. But good things happened. So um, yeah. I mean, you ask me the questions. So we'll go into that in a minute.
No, it just seems like you really have an ability to just kind of bounce back from situations and just really take it for what it's worth and just keep, kind of going forward.
I think
A lot of,
anybody in the military who spent any significant amount of the time in the military, that's kind of those are like superhero powers when we get out, and not all the
right.
time, and not for everybody, but at least we're at least um, used to uncomfortable situations, I would say, you know.
Right, that resilience, and I think that is one of the things that a lot of people don't necessarily take into account when they put their job ad out on like LinkedIn or Indeed. And it's hard to really like ask a person how resilient they are. But I feel like when you talk about a military veteran, especially one that's a pilot from the from the Army, that person is tough. And you kind of strike me as a person that's really you seem to find success just like serendipitously. Could you talk a little bit about how you were able to get your job in Cebu?
Yeah, sure. So I was in a town in Romania. I live in Bucharest, and but my wife was really cool and gave me a tour of the country at the end of the summer about a year and a half ago. We checked out all the castles, checked out the Danube Delta, which is beautiful, the Black Sea coast, and the Carpathian Mountains, Transylvania, everything. Beautiful country. And we were in Sibiu, which is a town kind of at the base of the mountains, in the center of the country. And we were basically just hanging out. She was showing me the city, and yeah, I happenstantially met the lead guide for a heliski company, and I just wanted to talk to him about heliski. I heard him say the words heliski, and I was like, "Oh, you have heliski in Romania?" Like I grew up doing extreme sports, skiing, snowboarding, surfing, skateboarding, all that stuff. So the idea of being dropped off by a helicopter and skiing really adventurous terrain was like perfect, And it took about 2 beers before he was like, "Oh, what do you do?" I was like, "Oh, I'm a helicopter pilot." He's like, "What? You're a helicopter pilot? We need a helicopter pilot." So so yeah, so
Crazy.
that's kind of how I met these guys and got hooked up with them. So I spend the winter times up in the mountains with those guys. And when I'm not flying, I get to be another pair of eyes on the mountain, unofficial ski guide, and make sure that everyone's having a good time, being safe. And I always take my camera, so I was uh, act as photographer as well, and so it's just all around.
Nice.
You couldn't ask for a better existence doing that kind of thing. And then the rest of the year, I just fly private for airplanes and helicopters, corporate stuff. It's pretty cool.
That is awesome, and I feel like you really have an awesome growth mindset. Could you talk a little bit about how that has really changed your outlook on life and how it's impacted your career so far?
Sure. I think all of us, as we grow up, we go through the school system. We learn fundamentals, but real life application is lacking. There's a disconnect between what you learn in school and how to use it in real life. and
Right.
we don't know that until we go through these things. I mean, there's uh, a lot of books out there, but I guess the biggest difference is uh, in school you're given the answers and then the test and asked to regurgitate them. In real life, you're given the test first, and then only afterwards do you know the answer, whether it was the right way to go or not. And so wouldn't you figure that the life lessons we learn actually stick with us much better than the school lessons? Um, but yeah, on my first deployment in 2010, and I actually joined the Army. I was a musician in the Army. I was in the Army band. So I was in Afghanistan for a
That's
year,
awesome.
traveling around the whole country, playing drums, playing AC/DC, Skinnerd with the 101st Airborne Division rock band for a year. And I had a really good reading schedule. I would read a fiction book for fun, a uh, a classic, because everybody everywhere in movies and things like that, people are able to like quote classic novels and stuff. I don't know if people really do in real life, but it made me think like, oh, maybe there's something to actually knowing classic literature, and then a self-help book. And so I had that cycle going through the whole deployment. But I was young. I was like 24, 25 years old. And like most of us, didn't have a financial education, didn't grow up with one. Unless you happen to grow up with a father, maybe in business, you learn some of these things. But even if you go to school for accounting, what did they teach you how to do? Or economics? You learn about markets, you learn about systems, but you learn how other people's money works and how to manage it. You don't get taught how to make money. Like that's the big difficulty. Um, so the next deployment, I read Rich Dad Poor Dad at the request of my little brother. He said it was a really good book, and for every single uh, other book that's mentioned in that book, I wrote it down, and that became my reading list. And so then I'd go to the next book, and then so basically I'll never catch up with my reading list because it just exponentially grows. And I might cherry pick like, okay, what do I want to read next or whatever. But I gave myself a financial education through a bunch of books, and I realized that if I want to be entertained, I can watch a movie in 2 hours and be entertained. And if I'm taking the time it takes to read a book, days and days of reading, depending on how much time you have, it's like, okay, I better be learning something from it. So I pretty much changed um, my reading list to the only thing I read is stuff that can better me as a person, to grow as a person, and all those insights from all these different books. It's never the main chapter that speaks to you or helps
Mhm.
you. It's always what's in the details. That's why like I was on an app, Headway, I think it was, where it gives you like they hire an author to break down like a Jordan Peterson book into like 7 pages and all the main points or whatever, like those type
Mhm.
of things. And um, it just didn't do anything for me because sure, the main points are like, okay, clean your room. That's great. Clean your room. I get it. I understand the analogy and everything, like because you set up your day right and you do this and that or whatever. But it doesn't give you those little details that actually make you profoundly think about your own situation and how you could change it. That really open your eyes and give you those like aha moments. That's in all the subtext. So it is really important to actually read full books and not just try and accomplish everything as quickly as possible. Take the time, look at the details, and be a nerd. I'm a book nerd. I love reading. So yeah,
Right.
but it's really helped my life out a lot. It's allowed me to grow as a person immensely in probably the last, I don't know, 5-6 years.
Mm, that's awesome. When you think about financial literacy, I feel like everybody has their own path. For me, I didn't know that much about real estate until I went to a real estate development
Ah,
program, and
oh,
then
cool.
I learned, okay, wait a second, refinancing. Whoa, hold on a second. So if you refinance 100 units, whoa, oh my God. So I had
Yeah,
this like epiphany in class
yeah,
one
yeah.
day. So when you talk about those aha moments, what was the aha moment for you when it came to financial literacy? Like what's your go-to
Oh, that I
thing right
didn't
now?
know anything when I started. Is I think it became the more books I read, the more I realized I didn't know and I had to learn. And it's like, yeah,
Mm,
a book like Rich Dad Poor Dad could break everything down in a simple storytelling format that makes that gives you broad brushstrokes, but the details are the devil's in the details and everything. Like you're talking about real estate. He talks about dealing wheeling and dealing real estate and making a fortune off real estate, and that's awesome.
right.
However, uh if you're not local and you can't manage your own properties and you have a property manager like my house in upstate New York, I went through a nightmare for 3 years in a row with just
Mm,
crappy property manager after crappy property manager. It just made me realize that, like, this is so much effort and
yeah.
taking up so much of my time, and I'm constantly like I'm having to be the one to ask for information and do all this. I was like, maybe real estate is not my thing, at least maybe not right now, or maybe it's just in a bad spot, or whatever. Like, it's just everyone
Yeah.
has something that speaks to them. The aha moment for me wasn't necessarily in reading there, not financially anyways, but uh when I moved to Romania, like I was like, man, I can never do anything with money. I can never get ahead no matter how hard I try. And then I moved over here and it's like, whoa, like a beer is like the equivalent of 80 cents,
Oh my
like,
gosh.
yeah. And it just
Lovely.
made me realize that, like, there's a whole world out there. And I started listening to a podcast. Oh man, what's it called? Uh, it's with Andrew Henderson, the
Hmm.
Nomad Capitalist. That's a great podcast. Talks about going in all kinds of different countries and and capital cities and stuff. It's very very interesting, different take on the world. But for me, reading the aha moment wasn't financial. It was very much um, talking about being in service to others, and I never really understood what that means, what it meant. And I was like, well, of course, I'm always trying to do nice things for other people or whatever. But what I learned was I was always so focused on what I want and what I need that I was always approaching things from a mindset of how do I get what I want, instead of when I kind of changed my attitude a little bit. I started saying, well, I started asking myself, not out loud, I
Hmm.
started asking myself, like, how can I help this person with their project? And number one, is this a good person to know? Do I get along with them? Are they smart? Or, do we have a lot enough in common that there's a reason for me to interact with this person? But how can I help them with their project? And so I just started doing that. And after a very, very short time, I had people contacting me that I had no idea who they were, and they just said, "Hey, this other person recommended you. Like, I've got this really cool idea. Like, I think maybe, like, I just don't know how to do it. And my friend said you're really smart and you have a lot of leadership experience and blah blah blah. Like, how do you think we could do this or whatever?" Like, I mean, just so many opportunities, and even more so when I moved here. It's insane. It's really been insane. So yeah, in order to get paid here, I just had to start a company, the equivalent of a LLC in the U.S.
Hmm.
The taxes are amazing here, especially if you're an expat, and you're administrator of your own company or limited company. And yeah, I mean, it's been amazing. The amount of opportunity I've had here is, probably way more than I ever expected I'd get in my entire course of my lifetime in the U.S. It's been pretty cool.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of what it just seems serendipitous. You live your life. You know that you're a good person. You put out great vibrations, and it seems like those vibes just come right back to you. Is that kind of how you think about it, or is it just like, hey, man, this is crazy? Like,
Honestly, I think I'm just I've always enjoyed taking the less walked path. I guess you,
mm,
you could say. So for me, like I remember when I was in Oregon. I was in a band. I made my parents super happy. I didn't do super well in college the first year, so I made them super proud. I dropped out and joined a rock band and went on tour. and,
perfect.
but I was having a conversation with my friend where she worked at a grocery store, and her friend was standing next to her, and they're like, "Oh, you're moving to California?" I decided to go to music school in Los Angeles because I was like, okay, if music is what I want to do, I want to do it right. I want to get a formal music education and all this stuff. And she's like, man, I'd love to move to California. And I was living in Oregon at the time. And I was like, well, why don't you move to California then? She's like, oh, well, I don't know anybody there. I'm like, okay, I don't know anyone there right now either. Like the only people I know are in Northern California, and like Southern California is a completely different state, basically. And she's like, oh well, I have a job here. I couldn't get a job there. I was like, you work at Albertsons. There they have Vons. You could request an intercompany transfer. And it's just like she just kept giving me excuses and giving me excuses and giving me excuses for everything I pointed out that she could do. Oh well, I don't have enough money. I was like, okay, so you know, save save your money for a down payment on an apartment and first month's rent, and transfer your job, go down there, have some fun, meet some cool people, you'll be fine.
Right.
Like,
Right.
and this is something that's really interesting because it kind of ties into where I've chosen to direct my business.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I had to form the LLC to get paid business to business here, um, as an expat, um, I was like, okay, well, I have a business, so I should do something with it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I grew up in the extreme sports. I love skiing, I love snowboarding, love surfing, all those things. And they're now Olympic sports. It's not counterculture anymore. It's not just X Games. It's real life, hard training athletes with coaches, with teams, with not not let's go party and punk rock and drink beer and then launch ourselves off ramps, still drunk from last night. That's like what we grew up with. um
It's hilarious.
it's a different world, but there's like no infrastructure here, and these are all Olympic sports. And I
Mm-hmm.
have an 8-month-old son,
Mm-hmm.
and he's a Romanian citizen and a US citizen, and we're not planning on moving back anytime soon. So for me, it's like, okay, well, those sports are what made me who I am. And it's really interesting. I read an article in Forbes, and it was talking about the 750 most successful CEOs in North America, in, well, specifically US and Canada. And they did a survey, and turns out like over 70% of them either used to, currently, or currently participate in what would be considered an extreme sport. And what they found is like those sports, you're the only person who you can rely on to succeed or fail. You don't have a team. You can't blame Johnny if he misses a goal or something like that. And those are important for teamwork, but for building your own character, I mean, skateboarding, you're falling down over and over and over and over again, and hurting yourself and breaking bones, and yet you still want to get up and do it again. So they teach resiliency. They teach what pain feels like. They teach you your boundaries and how to push past your boundaries. And surfing, like, you can go to the beach, and no matter how much you want to surf, you can look at the conditions and say, it's a little too big today. I'm gonna, and you sit there for 5 hours making the decision, like, do I really want to go in the water, or is this beyond my ability level? So they teach you also how to say no to situations. So they really
Mm-hmm.
teach you your boundaries, when to push them, when not to, and risk assessment, and all those things. And I think, like, growing up doing those things, it really set the stage for how I would decide to live my life, whether uh, in what society we consider a safe way, a practical way, or an adventurous way. And it's one thing you learn about safety is, I mean, no matter how hard you try, you can't keep yourself safe all the time. You can trip down the stairs, and like my friend JD in LA, he slipped off the fifth story fire escape, because that's the way he would go up and down from his apartment, and it was safe. It's like a normal ladder. It's just on the fifth story up, he slipped and fell, and he didn't survive. And you can trip downstairs. You can get hit by
That's
a
what I heard
car.
of.
You can get disease. You can get all these things. It's like, and it's safety and risk are something that you can actually have some control over, in what you're comfortable with, right? Like if you were to go on a NASCAR track and drive a car 200 miles an hour around a circle, that would be very unsafe to you. But if you went through a race training program and did all that stuff, I mean, how often do people die in NASCAR? Yeah, every once in a while, but not super often. More people die in car crashes from DUI or or something like that. So it's all relative, I guess, is the point, you know. But
Mm.
yeah, I think that's where it comes from for me.
Man, that's so real, and I know that you really have an incredibly purpose-driven approach to why you wrote your book. And
Oh yeah,
could you talk a little bit about the book
sure. So I have a terrible
and how that
memory.
came about?
I have a really
Okay.
terrible memory. And when I was a kid, both my grandparents were in World War II. My mom's dad was in on a destroyer. He was a radio man in the Pacific, and my dad's dad was an artillery officer in Europe. Took part in the Battle of the Bulge and all that. He was part of the 101st Airborne Division, and I never got to know them as what they went through. Even my dad's dad I never met. He died when my dad was 13. But my mom's dad, like, I was just a little kid growing up. I didn't know to ask him questions about what his experience was, and unfortunately he died before I joined the military. So once I had that experience, I couldn't have that bond that relate, to compare, what we went through differently. So I decided that at least for my first combat deployment as a pilot, I wanted to write down my memories of that experience for at that point I didn't have a kid yet or anything like that, but at least if I was going to have a child or grandchildren or anything like that eventually, I wanted that to be there. And then I thought also, okay, well, maybe some of the guys, that I served with, maybe they would appreciate at least someone writing down all the stories, even if it's not from the same perspective. That'll at least jog their memory so they can tell those stories to their families too. So I wrote it, and I found that I hated writing growing up, always did.
Yeah.
And I found that the more I wrote, the more I enjoyed it, the more therapeutic it was to go through the process. And I remembered a lot more than I thought I did. And so I ended up with almost 700 pages on Word. and so it took 2 years to get the book published because we had to cut down the book basically in half and trim all the fat. But I found through a friend, I found a alternative to self-publishing. Like, you can self-publish on Amazon and go through that whole process. But the alternative to self-publishing is highly recommended. They have editors they hook you up with, and yeah, you still have to pay out of your own pocket, but they help you along the way, and they dampen the costs because they guide you in the right direction, and then at the end of the day you split the profits with them. It's totally fair. They let you know all the secrets, like Amazon basically takes 60% of your book profits and all this other stuff.
Nice.
Yeah, I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, they're like, don't tell when you advertise our book, don't advertise on Amazon, advertise our website.
Oh my
It'll be
gosh.
way better for you. I was like, okay. But it was awesome. It was a really great process, and I highly recommend it to anyone who has a story. If you're a veteran and you were deployed, even I didn't think anyone in the military would care about my story, and that's a lot of people did. I was really surprised. I'm like, what? You guys know the story? Like, you've done this too? Like, you've gone and deployed, yeah. But they're like, yeah, but yours is different than ours. Ours is different than yours. So, if you're a veteran, you have a war story, tell it. And I mean, it could just be Kuwait. It could be the barracks. It could be like the black mold in the barracks, and wherever. I mean, that's a story too. It could be JRTC exercises and playing pranks on each other. Like,
Yep.
all those are great stories that you will never forget. And when you tell them to your civilian friends and colleagues, they're like, "What?" It's like almost unbelievable. So I highly recommend it. It's a great process, and it's very therapeutic, even if you're not a writer. I think I wrote more in that period of time for that book than I wrote in my entire life combined.
Mm.
And there's no such thing as writer's block, right? Just make a goal. Like, I'm going to write 5 pages a day, 7 pages a day, something like that, whatever you have time for. And don't even think about the wording. Don't think about anything. Just be like, man, what was that one time? This one time, or what? If it's a military story, it has to be like, uh, you know, no, there I was, true story. Like, it's not a real story unless you say that at the beginning. So,
Right.
yeah. But
That's so
anyway,
funny.
yeah, it's cool,
Uh,
man. Really cool.
Are you gonna have an audiobook, or how do you feel about audiobooks
I
in
think
general?
they're awesome. I used to drive long distances in the States. I drive long distances here too sometimes to go up to the mountains and everything. And books on tape make time go by real fast. Same with podcasts. But the interesting thing is I have my own recording setup, studio setup. So I actually approached my publisher. I was like, "Hey, um, maybe we'll do an audiobook. Have you guys done that? You know, because it's not a huge publishing company. Tactical 16, that's the publishing company. They're out of Colorado Springs. And I was like, like I have my own recording stuff. I can just do it myself. Like don't pay anybody. I don't need to go to a studio. I can literally sit here and do it myself. And then I was toying with the idea of my friends um, who are in the book, getting them to just like on their phone do voice recordings of like the pilot stuff, like tower, this is a chopper, whatever, and then just
Oh, that'd
putting
be nice.
like an audio filter over it so it sounds like the helicopter or whatever. But I don't know. We'll see what happens. I'll probably do it, whether or not they have a means to release it. I think they're still working on that, but we'll see.
That's awesome. I just got chills. I was like, that would be dope to
Yeah, it
see
would be
that
pretty funny, man. It'd
or
be
to
cool.
hear that.
Yeah.
Yeah, seriously. Well, Spencer, I mean, I think that you have really crushed it in life and you continue to crush it. And I know that does this feel like just the beginning, or does it feel like maybe a second or third life for you? Like
Yeah.
how does this moment
I,
feel?
I had a I had a friend when I was 30 years old. Like we are just like having fun telling stories, and she goes, "Man, you've lived 60 years in 30."
Like, yeah.
And honestly, it does. I feel like each phase represents its own area of life, but like I don't know, it's the older we get, the more we know ourselves, and some people have difficulty, with being comfortable in their own skin or whatever. But I think we all go through phases. I guess I can answer your question with a short story that was pretty funny. My mom's a Spanish teacher, a middle school Spanish teacher, and I think I was 31 years old. I was visiting her, and she had a couple of her teacher friends over, and they're in their 60s, and it was just me and three 60 some odd year old women drinking too much wine, hanging out, So we all had a little too much wine, and one of them was
Nice.
like made the comment, to be young again. I was like, okay, that's cool. Like, how young would you be? Like 20 something, like go back to 18, like the good old years. And they're like, no, man, like your late teenage years, your early 20s suck. They're just terrible. You still care too much about what everybody thinks. Everybody's your friend. You think you know everything. The world hasn't beat you down yet. You don't have a job good enough to really afford the things you want, take the vacations you want, like all that stuff. And then I was like, okay, all right, well, that makes a lot of sense. They're like, no, no, your 30s through 55, 30 to 55 are the best years of your life because you stop caring about what everyone else thinks. You start getting to know yourself and who you really are and what you really want out of life, and you find ways to maneuver towards that. And your friends list gets much smaller, but that's good because you realize what the difference between real friends, colleagues, coworkers, and acquaintances. You learn what those definitions really mean, and if you do okay with your life, then you really start being able to accomplish the things you want to accomplish. But you don't really know what you want to accomplish until those opportunities present themselves, and that's usually not until a little bit later, like in your 30s or so. I don't know. It's everyone's got their own path, man. For me, I love where I've ended up. Uh I never imagined I would end up on the other side of the world, and willingly, and be happy about it, like super stoked about it. And like I just feel like it's strange. I feel like I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing where I'm supposed to be doing it. And I've never had that feeling about something before. Maybe that's why I've traveled around so much and done so many different things. But yeah, it's crazy, man. But everything you do, you learn lessons that you can take to every other thing you will do. So it's important to not forget the hard things you go through, and also the good things you go through, because all those things are those life lessons that you learn the answer afterwards. Just don't forget and repeat the same mistakes over again. So it's interesting, man.
Yeah, that is interesting. And you're glowing, man. So it seems like you're really doing something right, in this world. Um, I love to hear that. But as we wrap up, Spencer, if there was one action that you would urge the listeners to take after listening to your episode, what would that action be?
Um, I would say, first of all, you know, even if you, while you're in the military, you live a life defined by the military, your real life starts after the military. I mean, for sure. There's so many skills you have. Just I would say take stock of your toolkit. Your emotional toolkit, your intellectual toolkit, everything you have that the military's taught you, and try to figure out as you're transitioning how you can apply those skills in the civilian world, because we go through a whole lot of stuff that civilians do not go through, not even close, and that they can't even relate to. So it's not only just about understanding what tools you have and how to use them, but also being able to be smart with how you explain things to other people. Because we're used to a certain way of doing things in the military. The civilian world doesn't act that way, and a lot of veterans have trouble meshing into the civilian world. So really be careful with your words, not for fear of anything bad happening, but just be careful with your words, because most likely the way you want to explain it, the person on the receiving end is still not going to understand. you know so you have to be the one to try to bridge that gap, because you're probably the only one that can. But yeah, be realize life starts after the military, and do everything you can as you're transitioning to take care of yourself on the way out. If your unit thinks you're awesome as you're transitioning out of the military, you're not doing enough for yourself, and you're going to have a hard time once you get out, because you're doing too many things at the unit. If your unit thinks you're terrible and you went from being an awesome performer to a lower level performer on your way out, like, that's probably a good sign that you're setting yourself up for success on the way out, because you're taking enough time for yourself. And the military just keeps rolling along. They don't really care about you. Once you're gone, no, they don't care about you. It's just they're trying to squeeze the last juice out of you. So do what you can for yourself. You really need to. Probably the last year, 9 months at the minimum.
That's some of the best advice that I've heard in a very long time for transitioning veterans. And I just really appreciate it because of the honesty. A lot of times people might not share that.
I mean, and that's why every at least in the Army, every unit, the transition unit to get out, SFL, TAP, whatever it's called now, that's why there's a command sergeant major there to go to bat for you. I mean, especially if you're enlisted, that sergeant major is literally there to, if you're having problems, your unit's saying, well, you're not here enough, you're going to the SFL TAP lessons or whatever, you're going to this internship program or something, like, use that sergeant major, have him call your sergeant major, say, hey, leave this kid alone, man, he's got to set himself up for success. I mean, nobody in the civilian world cares how many Article 15s you have. Like, it really doesn't make a difference. So yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
That is just golden. Spencer, we might need a part 2 at some point when you write the next book, or after you get your podcast going. But no, man, I really appreciate your time, and thank you for joining us for the Living Legends series. This was awesome.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, man. If you don't mind, real quick, hey, check out tactical16.com. That's my publisher. The book is called Time of Flight. You can tell I wrote it for myself, not for anyone else, because I don't even have a copy on my desk to show you guys right now. I'm terrible. That's okay. But check it out. Time of Flight. It's about Iraq 2016 and retaking Mosul from ISIS, and going from being a pilot that flies a gunship to actually employing the gunship in combat for the first time, getting shot at, all those things for the first time, and becoming a gun pilot. It's a pretty cool story. We did some pretty cool stuff, so check it out.
Sounds like that could be a movie. Do you have visions of that?
You know what? I thought so too. I was like, because the Army has what the Navy has Top Gun. The Army had that terrible movie with Nick Cage in the 80s called Firebirds. Like, oh god, just horrible movie. So I was like, oh man, maybe this could be. And my my cousin-in-law, my wife's or my cousin's husband, he actually has a production company in Vegas and Hollywood. And so I sent him, I was like, hey man, like, do you think we can make this a movie? And he goes, I'll tell you what, let me send you something. And so for the next like 3 weeks, he proceeded to forward his entire spam email box to me. And everything was like, hey, I've got this great idea for a movie. You know?
Oh,
I was like, okay, dude, I get the point. You can stop. It'll stay a book. It's fine. Yeah,
it's cool.
I love that. Sam's a good guy.
You can make your own audio book movie, and then that'll be fun.
Yeah, there you
know?
Go. Yeah, right.
Well, cool, Spencer. It's definitely a pleasure, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, man. You too. It's evening here. You're just starting your day, huh?
Yeah. All right.
Thanks, man.
Talk to you soon.